Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Andi Stout's poetry book, Tiny Horses Don't Get a Choice. Now, this video has been rather a long time in coming. This book came out in 2016, but I actually knew and had more or less read the book before that, because Andi is my partner, and I was there throughout the period when most of the material in the book was written or revised, and I was there when the book itself was put together. So this is a book I have a long history with. I've been sort of meaning to make a video about it for quite a while now. I tried to set up a couple of different interviews with people. We were never really able to pull something together, but Andi's birthday is coming up from time of posting. So I thought I would go ahead and just make this video myself. So Tiny Horses Don't Get a Choice. This is absolutely one of my favorite poetry collections, not just because Andi is my partner, but because I genuinely think it's a really brilliant, properly good collection. So there's three broad themes that the poems in this book deal with, and that's family, particularly the women in Andi's family, or the poet persona's family more accurately, West Virginia politics and labor, and teaching. These are the three broad themes. But the collection as a whole, I actually want to start with the overall structure of the book, because the structure itself tells a story here. In the contents section, you can see very clearly there's four different major sections: finding voice, finding home, finding fault, and finding purpose. So the structure of the collection, the way that the poems themselves are organized, is meant to tell a story, telling the story about finding one's self, finding one's own identity, finding one's place in this case, West Virginia, Appalachian culture, but finding one's place in home, finding out what that means. Learning to be comfortable with imperfections, learning to be comfortable with things that are incomplete. And then finally, figuring out what you want to do, what you want to go forth into the world to achieve based on your voice, your home, and your faults. So the poetry collection itself, each poem tells a story because these are narrative poems, but the collection as a whole also gives us a narrative arc. So in terms of the three themes of this poetry collection, the big themes, I want to start by talking about teaching, I think. Kind of an arbitrary choice of a place to start, but this is deeply connected to issues of labor. Actually, so I'll start with labor in West Virginia politics, and then that'll take us into education. So Andi is from West Virginia. A lot of her poems are rooted in West Virginia and particular events or issues facing West Virginians. Again, especially related to education. But one of her poems that was very, very specific and very politically rooted in a particular moment was the 12 days of the West Virginia chemical spill and counting. So this is based on, I think it was 2013, maybe, Freedom Industries, which was a chemical company. Their storage tanks, because of deregulations, they didn't have to comply with EPA regulations. They leaked a bunch of chemicals into the rivers in southern West Virginia. And that basically poisoned a whole bunch of counties in southern West Virginia. So the poem, The 12 Days of the West Virginia Chemical Spill and Counting. Day 1, West Virginia residents in 9 counties: Jackson, Roane, Clay, Putnam, Cable, Logan, Kanawha, and Boone check into Charleston Trauma Center, reporting symptoms of nausea, vomiting, and skin irritation. Day 2, 787 cases of exposure. 9 of 55 counties can't use the water. Piped into homes, hospitals, schools, and offices, all contaminated. Day 3, NBC Nightly News covers the story for 2 minutes and 28 seconds. For emotional appeal, executives in business suits decide a child must be present in frame at 39 seconds. A mother with the appropriate twang questions why she's paying for water unsafe to drink. A semi-tanker is stationed in a parking lot outside the hospital. Water is distributed like government cheese, on the dole. No one knows when the issue will be resolved. Day 4. The New York Times exposes lax regulations. Freedom Industries' storage facility sits a half-mile upstream from a water treatment plant, the largest in the state. West Virginia regulation does not require inspection for storage facilities, only production. Lawmakers and politicians offer no answers. Everything travels downstream. Cincinnati shuts down intake valves from the Ohio. Day 5. Governor Earl Ray Tomblin begins lifting restrictions on drinking water in zone priority. Day 6. Erin Brockovich posts photos on Facebook, a porcelain bathtub filling with yellow water tinged green, a caption that asks, "And it's clean?" Day 7. Freedom Industries files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They will pay back nothing and refuse to comment. Day 8. Senator Manchin says he will continue to fight back against Environmental Protection Agency regulations. He quotes Montani semper liberi, but has no idea what it means. Day 9. In an interview, he expands on the theme, coal and chemical inevitably bring risk, but that doesn't mean they should be shut down. The newspaper calls him Mr. instead of Senator. So he quotes Cicero because he's been told it'll make him sound intellectual at cocktail parties in D.C. Day 10. Snow covers potted seedlings like souffle skin. Locals go out to measure icicles hanging from houses. Mom calls to say, leave the faucets dripping. Day 11. Freezing fog hangs in the air, delicate and vicious. Plows run, but streets are covered again in minutes. Cars drive white-knuckled in a creeping line. The world is again preoccupied with Chris Christie. They deem it Bridgegate. Day 12. The West Virginia House of Delegates declares a West Virginia Prayer Day. Prayer will not create appropriate living wages or money for education. Prayer will not clean up the water supply. We do not need a leader sitting on his knees genuflecting in prayer pose. We need an Elizabeth Warren for West Virginia. Someone armed with a pen, the knowledge to use it, and a few scratch sheets of paper. For House of Delegates, one needs to be at least 25 years old, a citizen of the U.S. for 7 years, and an inhabitant of the state they represent at the time of election. For Senate, one must be at least 30 years old, a U.S. citizen for 9 years, and an inhabitant of the state they represent at the time of the election. Now, who will it be? So this is one of Andi's most directly political poems. But this is a continuing theme throughout the collection. Again, this idea of labor rights and environmental exploitation and these kinds of things that make conditions at best tenuous for people living in West Virginia. And the way that those problems are exacerbated by particular choices made by politicians, and particularly by the rhetoric of freedom, of liberty, of choice, and things like this that often obscure a reality of corporations getting to do what they want. There not being consequences for people who poison the water in 9 counties, etc., etc. And again, this is linked very much to the working conditions of academia, of higher education, but also of public school education in West Virginia. So in terms of the higher education connection particularly, I want to read you this poem, Red Neckerchief, after Florence Reese and Billy Bragg. A university president knots his bow tie one tail at a time, preparing for his PBS interview. Institutions had an idea to adopt a laissez-faire approach. He says privatizing parking increases profit margins. Tuition hikes provide opportunities for synergy. He laces his fingers together for dramatic emphasis, as if talking points do not require a context. Which side are you on, boys? He'll say, which side are you on? The football team is now a brand. Whispers of revolution won't be placated. Sedition dispenses like candy-coated peanuts out of rest stop vending machines. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? At night, contingent faculty meet over Cards Against Humanity. They talk about the nets around Foxconn in Shenzhen, April dew collecting on white threads, a pillow of mesh circling buildings like planetary rings viewed through a blurry photo lens. Here there are no muted ghosts. Here voices have gravity. They wonder, what would those nets look like surrounding ivory towers? Where does education come from? It is handmade, stitched together by 2 hands, 10 fingers, all working in unison, fastening ethics to assignments, providing safe places to explore identity, even under impossible deadlines, even when markers are all dried up, even when the chalk is gone. Pens out of ink. They pore over student essays 14 hours a day, gladly, because there is beauty in argument. Just like their families taught them. Red neckerchiefs cinched on belt loops or folded and wrapped around wrists like bangle bracelets, dangle reaching for question cards, a reminder they are human. Packed down like miniature Shetlands, revisions hang over their shoulders in patched canvas messenger bags. Tomorrow they'll have adjunct added to the dictionary because tiny horses don't get a choice. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? And this is sort of carried through. There's a larger poem called Education Obituary, which I also really love, but I'm not going to read that one out because it is fairly lengthy. And I've already read a couple of lengthy poems. But the other one related to education I am going to read is a short one called Tiny Gods. And this actually, my most recent tattoo is inspired by this poem. Tiny Gods. Tiny gods are not afraid to teach in the dark. They make their own light. Twinkle bulbs on the tip of each singed finger spell out their importance in triangles and Venn diagrams. That's not to say they don't swab hand-set wounds. They know bone isn't meant to scrub clean. It's the break and reform of the clavicle they're interested in, a lump of callus. Tiny gods stand at the gravel toes of dirt roads, towel-dried, waiting for corn-colored deer to blink. So, again, these are 2 of the really big themes. They're very, very much interconnected here. These ideas of work, of deregulation, of conditions in West Virginia, etc., etc. There's a very strong ethos here in the protest tradition. Again, people like Florence Reese and Billy Bragg were mentioned as the inspirations for Red Neckerchief. These types of folk singers, people who are pro-union, pro-labor, pro-organizing, and pro-equality and justice are very much big influences here. But the other element of this poetry collection is this sense of family and of home, of the place itself. So I want to read you a few of the family-related poems, because I love the political poems because they are engaged and they are active and they have a clear ethical stance, but I beyond love the family poems. I think they're generally just beautiful poems that tell amazing stories. So this is one called Ramps. In the kitchen, my grandmother and her sisters work like chemists, adding butter, pepper, a little garlic salt, their own family concoction to bring out flavor. Even though it's Lou's house, they look like a professional line in a family restaurant. Behind you, coming through, hot pan. They all know the layout perfectly, could walk it with their eyes closed. In her yellowed apron and mini pearl hat, price tag still on, Lou works all 4 burners. Steam rises from pots and pans, permeating nostrils, saturating clothes and hair with a scent that deafens the senses like wet skunk fart. It's a smell that can be heard and only rinses out over time. My grandmother's sleeves pushed up 3/4 plunges into cooling, boiling water, barehanded without flinching. She pulls out fistfuls of slender green stalks and white bulbs, chops them with precision, surgeon determination resting on her brow. She doesn't sweat in the humid kitchen. Jerry, middle child, passes dishes and whatever is needed between them. She checks cobblers in the oven, peach, blackberry, apple, recipes memorized by heart and 7 generations to feed. Salad will be the last dish made, garden tomatoes and cucumbers, Jerry's picked from Lou's vines, sliced like taken cross-sections. I stand in the corner of the doorway watching, lone shooter marble in my pocket. So for those of you who don't know, ramps is a very, very much a West Virginia food. They are like a kind of green onion, basically. They are... The taste is somewhere between garlic and onion. They're a garlicky onion that's often eaten with potatoes, often eaten with bacon, these kinds of foods. And it's a big, big deal in West Virginia. Like they grow wild over large portions of the state, and there's a number of ramp festivals and stuff. Like it's a big sign of West Virginia identity to eat ramps. I actually quite like ramps. I've only had them a few times, but Andi really hates them. She thinks they smell terrible. And in fairness, they do have a strong scent. Again, it is this sort of garlicky onion scent. But like people really, really love them. And they are this, because they're, again, this kind of festival type thing. They're a thing that brings people together in, I think, this really, really, really interesting local way. So I was going to read you a couple other family poems, but in the interest of keeping this video a manageable time, I'm just going to read one more poem. This is probably still, to this day, my favorite poem of Andi's. I think it's just a beautiful poem. I think what it does is brilliant across the board. So yeah, this is Portrait of a Hometown. A cashier at the only gas station in town struggles to give directions to an outsider. Pointing to the fountain drink maker, she tells him, "Cross the blue bridge. It's the color of blue." He's been up and down the main drag 3 times, but still can't find it. A nationwide insurance office my father used to run holds Weight Watchers meetings Sundays after church. A chalkboard sign advertises fat-free cookies and vitamin water. Lamar's Diner became Weiss Dentistry, across the street from his sister Lisa Weiss Ferguson, attorney at law. Cars sit in a tilted parking lot outside Foodland. All the vowels burned out, the sign flickers and hums. Weiss music is still Weiss music. When the Saints Come Marching In is the only song I remember how to play on the clarinet I haven't used in years, but tell my mother not to get rid of it. She sells it anyway. Dressed in polyester suits, Kiwanis sit at a reserved table drinking warm beer at the VFW. Sorting through boxes of used eyeglasses, donated, they discuss fundraisers, cakewalks and bake sales to keep active. City Council dusts off rusted railroad tracks and opens the mountain rail. From April to December, board any one of 4 unique trains, says the Barber Democrat. A few tourists, but mostly elementary school field trips, take the S-curve burrowing under Cheat Mountain, like garden adders under poplar porches. Military discount available. Round rock pillars stand in the middle of the river. From the bridge that washed away in the flood of '96, a new bridge was built, steel-reinforced concrete, the color of gray sand, but the locals still call it blue. I think it's a great poem. I think it's really, really fun. I think it does a great job sort of exploring these elements of local identity and how people in small towns sort of orient themselves to space, to location, and to the culture of the area, because so much of it is rooted in who owns particular businesses and things like this. I think it's a great poem. I think it's an amazing collection. Yeah. Happy birthday, Andy.